Jam on toast!
Hey everybody, I'm Cam. We're here today to talk about Platoon. The Defranco Movie Club's doing this one, and so here we go. The short sale on this one is that the movie follows a group of Army misfits through a tour in Vietnam. With that said, I'm going to do all I can just to not talk about the Vietnam War. My love for this one's got to be where the guy who plays a doctor in Scrubs hides in the foxhole and puts dead bodies on top of them so the Vietnamese guys don't stick them with the bayonets when they go through checking bodies. Confirm the kill. Very important rule that so many movies tend to miss. So my hate's gonna have to be probably the whole scene where they're in the village interrogating people. There's the scene where they pull the one-legged, possibly retarded guy out of the hole, and then the crazy guy with the combat shotgun just beats him to death. And then about, I don't know, 40 seconds later, like 4 or 5 of them are gonna gang rape 2 of the little girls from the village. And luckily Charlie Sheen and Willem Dafoe's character says something, because more than likely that would have led us to a gang rape scene, and that would have been a little too brutal of a reminder of the things that probably might have happened in the Vietnam War. But that is a major turning point in the morality buffer going on with Charlie Sheen's character, so leave it where it lies. Let it note that I had to take a break at that point and go give some kittens a bath. So our MVP of this movie would have to be Willem Dafoe. Charlie Sheen's kind of the main character and definitely leads the story along like a proper protagonist. Willem Dafoe is our moral counterbalance in a world where everybody is kind of doing whatever they want to do and following the orders to the loosest letter of the law. He's the one guy who's like, let's do some good. Let's do this and do our job and meet our honor and responsibility. And the reason they don't have him do it like that is because you couldn't watch the movie where that guy was talking. But without that character, it's really just a movie about how horrible people are. Moving on to categories. Aesthetics. I thought this was an amazingly accurate of Vietnam military personnel. I thought it was a very accurate representation of many of the stories that I've heard about. How they look, how the characters are, the explosions, the military maneuvers that they were going through, the way they were clearing through hidey holes, the way the Vietnamese were coming through and clearing bodies, because that's what you have to do in those situations. You definitely felt like you were watching a legitimate Vietnamese movie. It didn't occur to me once that, like, hey, they wouldn't do that. Actually, disturbingly came to my attention is that that's probably what we would see consistently through the movie. For that, I think aesthetics gets a 90. Character development. The movie kind of focuses on Charlie Sheen's character, but even though we see him grow and develop as a character throughout the movie, and we see him shift and find his morality, what he thinks is appropriate, what he thought was appropriate versus what has to be done now, they did a beautiful job representing that. They really did. And what's even more impressive is even though you're following this one guy around, you have this whole band of other dudes around him, and they take the time to develop those characters too. They have little side stories where they're talking, and like the guy writing a letter to his girlfriend who don't really know how anyway. They really paid attention, and they really gave you characters to give personalities to. While I personally didn't relate to a lot of them, especially the ones that stood out as villains in my mind, or at least not so good guys. And that whole tension between the moral characters and the morally gray characters definitely helps string you along throughout the movie, because it's not a movie about the U.S. soldiers versus the Vietnamese soldiers. Now, while they did a good job developing these characters, they're lightweight characters. They don't carry a lot of weight on the story individually, minus a couple characters. And like I said, I'm not very fond of many of them at all. So character development gets a 60. Storyline. Like I said, this isn't a story about the U.S. soldiers versus the Vietnamese soldiers. This is a story about U.S. soldiers versus U.S. soldiers during the Vietnam War, and all the interaction with the Vietnamese is just kind of outside interference. It's not the story I would have expected when I signed up to see this movie. I think there'd be a better story in a group of guys that are well-knit and on the same page going through and doing pretty much the same type of missions. But unfortunately, that was not the Vietnam War. I just think while they executed the story well enough, there was a better story to be had for the same budgets. Storyline gets a 60. Compulsion. I didn't really care for a lot of the characters, therefore a lot of what they were saying didn't matter to me. You had your important points, and those were very clearly marked. But a lot of the stuff in between, I just didn't want to watch. A lot of military movies I find myself bored. There's not enough substance to these types of movies for me, and I just get bored. I need something more than bullets and explosions. And being in the military and knowing several guys that have been in the military as well, and being familiar with the equipment and everything, and what is expected of you in the field, and the kind of horrible nonsense they have to go through, especially during the draft, which is what happened. Most of those guys were there under duress. It's not a story I want to hear for entertainment purposes, but it's the sort of thing everyone should read about for educational purposes. Compulsion gets a 50. Now, if you total all that up, we're going to end up with an average of 65. War is a horrible thing, and it's a terrible thing to trivialize it and make it an entertainment point. The Vietnam War especially bad. With that in mind, it's very interesting to give someone a lot of power and self-responsibility and very little consequence other than the guy next to him yelling at him. On top of that, they're invading a country full of people resourceful enough to build tunnel systems that rival rabbits. It gives you a terrible story for everyone. The people who don't want our soldiers there, the soldiers that don't want to be there, and everyone else who has to hear about it. While I don't recommend this movie personally, if you like military movies at all, this has to be a must-see. My best hope for this movie is that it inspires people to actually read up on the Vietnam War and see some of the accounts of the horrible things that happened there. That's all I got for you. I'm Cam Rye. Have a nice day.